Hey, Chrissy. Great to see you all today. How do you guys like to spend the weekend? What do you like to do on the weekends?
I usually just play with my best friend. Um, and sometimes on Saturday, I will go to my brother's archery because he has either archery on Thursday or on Saturday if we miss it.
Yeah, archery is pretty cool. Cross country races, that's very cool. Anybody else have anything fun they like to do? All right. I like to hike. I like to find new places to go hiking on the weekends. Yeah, my favorites are when you get to hike by water. And I found a really fun spot over this weekend for hiking at right along the Delaware River, which isn't far from me. All right. Anybody have any questions about any of the content so far? So I will be sending out progress reports at the end of this week. So you have the only thing that I can go on with progress are the due dates. So I know that I don't take off any points for a due date that's for a lesson submitted after the due date. But when I send a progress report, that's what I have to go on. So keep that in mind. As of Friday, whatever your grade is, that's what your progress report will say. And I will send them to you through Canvas. It'll be a Canvas. So hopefully you've got it set up to go right to your email as well. And your parents will get a copy of that as well. All right. So anybody, if you don't have any questions, let's go ahead and begin. All right. So we're not going to do a review of every chapter. Sometimes we're going to do a little mini review and sometimes we'll do an introduction, but I really consider it to be your job to read the text and then let me know if you don't understand something or let me know if you want more information. So I use these live classes more to give you supplemental things. We'll do case studies. Sometimes we'll do games. Sometimes I'll update information or cover things that aren't covered in your textbook. Today, what we're going to do is a little introduction to what's coming, to some of the topics that you're going to have this week. Now, if any of you guys ever have something you want to learn more about, if you have suggestions for things we can do in our live classes, please let me know because I really want this to be your class, to be meaningful to all of you. So everybody can see that where it says biology, right? Yes? Okay, excellent. I do have a couple of reminders here. First of all, keep in mind that AIM Academy is set for Eastern time, and I don't have any way to set it for several different time zones. We've got students really all over the world. Most of them are in the United States, and we just had to pick a time zone. Since AIM Academy's office is in the Eastern, that's the one that we use. Now, for those of you who live in another time zone, that means your due date time is going to be different. So, for example, if you live on the West Coast and you live in Pacific time, your due date is going to be 9 p.m. instead of midnight that day. And there's no way that I can change that because if I changed it to midnight for you, then it would register as the next day for people who live in the middle of the country or the East Coast. We'd be right back where we started again. But I do post the assignments at least usually 2.5 to 3 weeks before the due date. I feel like that means those 3 hours shouldn't really be a major issue for you. Just keep that in mind when you submit things. And I think it's a good idea for you to just always plan to work one day ahead so that that doesn't ever come up. And again, I don't take off points for assignments that are after the due date. The only thing that this is a consideration for is if you're going for that, you want to keep up with the due dates and with the live class. Okay. Please just ignore plagiarism check for now. When you submit something and you get a report back, we're working out some bugs with plagiarism check. One thing is if you include the question name, like, what I told you the question was, it's automatically going to give you a 50% match for plagiarism. Clearly, you're not plagiarizing. You're just copying the test questions in, and that's fine to do that. Now, I can't remove that from an assignment that's already been posted. So going forth, I'm probably not going to be using plagiarism check. I'll just go back to my other ways that I discovered issues. I don't find there are a lot of issues. So like I've said before, I trust you guys until you show me a reason not to. So I think you're all old enough to know that it's in your best interest to do your own work. All right, and then finally, I want to talk about numbering exam answers. So please use the numbers I've given for the questions. What that means is all of your answers have to be numbered. If I have questions 1 through 8 on an exam, then make sure that your answer that you call number 1 is my question 1, and your answer that you call number 5 is my question 5. If you number them differently or don't number them at all, it's just too hard to grade. And I'll end up marking off points where I shouldn't if you don't do it that way. So please use those numbers. If you want to copy the questions in and then put your answer right under it, that's fine. Just make sure everything is numbered. All right. Now, we're going to talk about the branch of biology that deals with the way relationships, the way organisms are related to one another and to their physical surroundings. What is that branch of science called? What are we going to be studying about today? Nathan?
Ecology.
Ecology. Yeah, it is ecology. So some of the content today will be a bit of a review from last week, maybe if we get there. Some of it will be an introduction to the content from this week, but I have a couple little ecology jokes for you here. I like this one. I just know this is going to mess with the ecosystem. Yeah. How about this one? What kind of fish is made with 2 sodium atoms? Kind of fish. Tuna. Remember, sodium on the periodic table is Na. So 2 sodium atoms is tuna. How about this one? What's the difference between weather and climate? You can't weather a tree, but you can climb it. Who's the new heifer? Never seen herbivore. All right. I asked around and nobody heard anything. That, of course, goes back to the, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And we actually will talk about that when we get to talking about hearing in the second semester. All right. So you guys, this week, you're going to learn about ecosystems and habitats. And I think one of the most fascinating things about organisms that share habitats is the way they interact with one another. So I want to talk about some of those interactions that organisms have with one another. Of course, they do interact within a community, and like so members of the same species are going to interact. Members of different species in a community are going to react with one another. So one of the ways that they do that is through what we call competition. So why might organisms of the same species compete? Why might there be competition between 2 of the same species of bird or 2 of the same species of fish? Gideon.
If there's limited amounts of food.
Yeah. Limited food. What else might be limited? Mates. Yep. Water. Living space. Those are all things that they would compete over. Now, members of different species might compete for the same things. There might be food that is shared by both different species. So the competition between members of the same species we call intra-specific competition. The competition between members of different species living in the same area is inter-specific competition. Now, sometimes competition might lead to this thing called resource partitioning. So in resource partitioning, both the organisms exist in the community by sharing that resource. So it happens when one of them changes its niche. So maybe there's 2 different species of lichen that are growing on a rock, and they might adapt so that one of them will grow on the side facing the sun and the other will grow on the side facing the darker side. or they might specialize into new niches altogether. So where maybe different sections of a tree or different sections of a forest might be the spaces that these different organisms grow on. That way there's less competition and more of a chance that more will survive. Now, this term symbiosis. So a lot of times the word symbiosis is confused in its meaning. Symbiosis just means two organisms that belong to different species who live closely together and have specific interactions. The word symbiosis can be broken down into three different kinds. One benefits one of them, but not the other. One benefits both, and one benefits one and harms the other. So a lot of times we'll hear that term symbiosis. We'll say like, oh, they're in a symbiotic relationship, as if the word symbiosis is always good. It's not. Depends on what kind of symbiosis we're talking about. Now, the word itself, the word symbiosis comes from a Greek word that means live together. So, or two Greek words that mean live together. Now, here are the three different kinds. There's one where one species benefits and the other is not affected at all. That's called commensalism. There's one where both species benefit, that's mutualism. And then where one benefits but the other is harmed, and that's parasitism. You probably already are familiar with the word parasite or parasitism. You already know what that one means. So you really just have to remember the other two. And this one's pretty easy, mutual. They both benefit. It's mutually beneficial to them. So then all you have to remember is commensalism, just the one. That's where one benefits and the other couldn't care less. So remember that organisms that are living together in an ecosystem depend on each other in order to survive. And sometimes they even depend on each other to keep their population from getting to be too big. So they're going to interact in a bunch of different ways that allow them to get food, to get shelter, to get protection, sometimes even transportation. So you can see them here. Mutualism is what we would call a plus-plus. They both benefit. Parasitism is a plus-minus. The green one benefits, the red one does not benefit. And then commensalism is where the little green guy is benefiting, he's getting some shade, but the big one is neither harmed nor helped in that situation. That's a commensalistic. Let's start with commensalism. One species benefits and the other is unaffected. Here's an example of that. There's a cattle egret, that's the bird, and cows. So what do the cows do? Well, they help the egret. The egret is looking for grasshoppers and beetles to eat, and as the cow walks along, it kicks up those grasshoppers and beetles. Now and then they might sit on the back of the cow. They might look for ticks and flies, but that doesn't really affect the cattle in any way. It's not like they're cleaner animals that are there for that purpose. It's just once in a while they'll end up sitting there. Here's a cute little cartoon for commensalism. If I'm neither helping nor hurting the whale, do I even exist? Barry Barnacle has a lot of time to ponder the deeper meaning of commensalism on his whale ride. Cute. All right, so commensalism. That is that +0 relationship. One party benefits and the other is not affected. So we're going to write that as a +0. And I found a good video that broke it up into parts for each of these different kinds of symbiotic relationships. We'll start with commensalism.
Here in nature, plants and animals interact all the time, but it can be a lot more complicated than just one thing eating another. These relationships between two different organisms can be examples of what we call symbiosis. Symbiosis can be defined as any kind of a close, long-term biological interaction between two different organisms. These interactions can be mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic. Today, we're going to explore the incredible world of commensalism. This big web is the home of a female spider of the genus Nephila. In her web are BB-sized spiders called dewdrop spiders, gleaming silver droplets sprinkled about. Nephila could care less. She doesn't seem to notice them. The prey Nephila wants are the larger things that fly or jump into her web. The dewdrop, on the other hand, is there to grab the smaller prey that Nephila discards. It also likes to drink the drops of dew that collect on Nephila's silken lines. The two species of spiders are feeding at the same table, you might say. And that describes commensalism. Commensalism is a symbiosis in which members of one species gain benefits, while the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. In Costa Rica, army ants roam freely over the floor of the jungle, ravaging everything in their paths. Other insects either flee or are carried off for dinner at a later time. This is an opportunity that can't be passed up. Numerous species of birds, such as the wood creeper, have become specialists at following army ants just to catch the insects stirred up in the chaos. Once again, commensalism and symbiosis in action.
All right, that's commensalism. One benefits, the other one neither harmed nor helped, plus zero relationship. The next one then is mutualism. So this is where it's mutually beneficial. Both of these organisms benefit from this relationship. Like the otter and the kelp is a perfect example. Otters help the kelp by eating the sea urchins, which endanger it. The kelp then provide an anchor for otters while they sleep so they don't float away. So this is a mutualistic relationship. If something happens to one species in a mutualistic relationship, both of the species are going to suffer. So think what would happen if somebody went in and just removed all the sea urchins there. Then the sea otters wouldn't have as much to eat, and the kelp then would not be able to help them to hold on to them. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship. We would call that a plus. So think about whenever you're looking at a mutualistic relationship, think about what each might be getting. When each benefits from the other, what do they get? What did the two get from that relationship? They become mutually dependent on one another in many cases. Now, there are some cases where in a mutualistic relationship, if one species is damaged or harmed in some way, another species comes in to take that place. But it's still going to be called a mutualistic relationship. So let's watch this mutualism video.
In mutualism, two organisms are in a relationship in which both members benefit. A classic example of this is the relationship between plants and pollinators. It's basically a win-win situation. Pollinators like bees and butterflies fly from flower to flower, feasting on nectar. In the meantime, the pollen that sticks to their bodies transfers from one flower to the next. The pollinated flowers are now able to develop into fruits. The insects get food, and the plants get pollinated. Like I said, a win-win situation. In South Florida, the corky stem passion vine is protected by a nasty little ant about 1/20th of an inch long called Wasmannia, the little fire ant. The ants are attracted to the plant, which not only provides nectar in its flowers, but from small nectaries on the stems of the vine as well. These little pots are filled with a nutritious liquid for the ants. The zebra longwing is one of 3 species of butterflies that lay their eggs exclusively on passion vines. The larvae, from the time they hatch, feed voraciously on the plant. Here's where Wasmannia comes in. In some cases, Wasmannia munches into the tiny butterfly eggs, killing them in the process. At other times, the ants merely check on the eggs as if they have other plans later on. Savagely, the ants stab into the tender larvae just as they're hatching and inject venom into them. The ants get food. The plant gets protection from herbivores. That's mutualism. We find mutualism as well under the sea. The polyps of corals have green algal cells called zooxanthellae living within their tissues. The algal cells provide sugars which they make through photosynthesis, something the polyps can't do. The polyps, in turn, provide a protected place to live, an animal and a plant, benefiting each other in a close relationship.
All right, and finally, everyone's favorite, parasitism. So this is where one species benefits, but the other is harmed, like you're harmed by a mosquito bite. And the mosquito benefits because it gets meal. Mistletoe is an example. Cute as it is, mistletoe is a parasite. Doesn't have any roots of its own, so it attaches to another kind of a plant, usually a tree, and it lives off that tree. Now, slowly over time, it can kill the tree. So the tree is definitely harmed in the process. So parasitism, we would say, is a plus minus relationship. Now, keep in mind, parasitism is not the same as a predator-prey relationship. The parasites don't generally kill their hosts. They can weaken their host enough that the host itself might die. And that's the case of the mistletoe. It's weakening the plant enough that the plant will die. But the parasite itself is not killing the plant. That would be a predator kind of a relationship. So let's watch this final video about parasitism.
The grasses of the Everglades are sometimes attacked by a parasitic plant called love vine. The name is misleading. If we look closely, we see that this love vine has little projections that penetrate the grass stems, sucking the life out of the plant. This is a great example of parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, the parasite benefits, but the host is harmed. Almost all animals are parasitized in some way, often by several different kinds of parasites at the same time. We humans have lots of them, like these mosquitoes that are sucking my blood. A parasite like this on the outside of the body of its host is called an ectoparasite. Ticks and leeches are ectoparasites as well. It's important to note that a mosquito bite is not a defensive sting, like you might get from a wasp if you accidentally disturb its nest. No, the mosquito is simply getting a meal, and only female mosquitoes feast on blood. They require a blood meal in order to produce their eggs, which hatch into larvae, which develop into pupae, which ultimately split open, and onto the surface of the water steps a new generation of mosquitoes. And this is what makes the female mosquito an ectoparasite. She gets what she needs, my blood, and her host, in this case me, gets harmed. Man, it's itchy. Let's get out of here. In parts of the tropics, a biting mosquito may inadvertently inject the microscopic plasmodia organisms that cause malaria. The plasmodia enter the red blood cells in the bloodstream of the host. They reproduce there and cause the corpuscles to explode. The result can be a feverish death. Any parasite attacking the inside of the body of its host is called an endoparasite. The human tapeworm is another endoparasite. You could have a 30-foot worm in your intestines, holding on by means of sharp hooks protruding from its head. The worm gets the food you need, helping itself, but hurting you in the process. That's parasitism. You might think parasites are just plain nasty, but they actually play a very important role. Without parasites, their host species can very well overpopulate an ecosystem, putting too much stress on the resources.
All right, so fortunately, tapeworms are not very common in our part of the world, so we don't have to worry about those too much. All right, now, when we've got organisms in these mutualistic relationships, they're both going to benefit, right? Mutualism is mutually beneficial. There's a plus plus. But sometimes there can be a wide variety of benefits. So sometimes one benefits a lot and the other benefits just a little. Now, there's a good example of where they both rely a lot on each other. And I like this example of mutualism. This is the acacia tree and acacia ants. So ants live inside the spines here on the tree, and they the spines are hollow, so the queen can go down inside there and lay her eggs safely inside there. Now the tree provides food for the ants. So the tree benefits the ants because, the tree benefits the ants because it gives them this place to stay and some food from the tree. But the tree benefits because the ants are guards. They protect the tree from other organisms like the insects that would eat and damage them. And these ants will even very aggressively go after bigger predators that might want to eat those leaves. Now, some of these ants are going to die in the process, but it's worth it to them. It's worth the whole colony because the whole colony will survive better because of the tree. So I want you to see this video about this acacia tree and ant. I just think it's a cool example of mutualism.
Whenever a huge tree falls in the Costa Rican rainforest, a gap of sunlight is formed in the canopy. New life competes for this light, like this vine racing this sapling upward. But there's one tree that never has any competition, thanks to an incredible symbiotic relationship it shares with an ant. The swollen thorn acacia and its namesake, the acacia ant, have developed harmonious roles in each other's lives. The ant's role is as protector. If any of those vines try to steal the acacia's light, the ant's security guards go to work. A few good chomps on the vine stems, and it's lights out for the vine. The ants don't stop there. This relatively huge grasshopper may think it's going to take a few bites out of the non-poisonous acacia, but the ants take a few bites out of it instead. And they throw in a few stings for good measure. In exchange for all this protection, the tree takes on the provider role. It gives the insect everything it needs in terms of food and shelter. These little nodules, or nectaries, secrete a sweet nectar for the adult ants to eat. And these brownish pods at the end of some leaves are the perfect, nutrient-packed food for the ants' developing young, called larvae. The acacia ant larvae live down hollowed-out thorns at the base of the acacia leaves. Some will eventually grow into adults with wings and will fly off to replicate this evolutionary masterpiece in a new acacia.
It's a pretty cool mutualistic relationship. So in other mutualistic relationships, an organism can survive if one of them dies. So an example of that is like the flowers and pollinators. If all of the butterflies died off, there are other pollinators. There are other insects, there are birds, there's even wind in some cases that can pollinate. So that's what we mean by degrees of mutualism. They benefit, but sometimes that degree is a little bit different. And often you can have several different organisms that are in a mutualistic relationship. It doesn't always just a one-to-one. So you guys have probably watched Finding Nemo, one of the cutest Disney movies, and you know about sea anemones and clownfish and how the sea anemone protects the clownfish. It can go right in there. Well, the sting of these anemones' tentacles provides the clownfish with some protection, because other fish might come along to eat the clownfish, but they're not going to come near the anemone. The fish then also defends the anemone against butterfly fish, which like to eat anemones. So that's a one-to-one. But there's another couple of ways that this anemone and clownfish symbiotic relationship works. So when the fish excrete their waste, there's ammonia in their waste. So that ammonia from basically the poop of the clownfish provides nourishment to the algae that live in the tentacles of the anemone. Okay, so now we've got a third organism. We've got algae that live in the tentacles. Now those algae are in a relationship with their host, with the anemone. They're going to provide some photosynthesis. The algae provides photosynthesis for the anemone. Remember, an anemone it looks like a plant, but it's not, it's an animal. So it doesn't do photosynthesis. It needs to get its nutrients from the outside. It gets it from algae, because the algae do provide photosynthesis and the products of that. So the algae are in this symbiotic relationship with this anemone. They provide photosynthesis and they get protection, and they provide these nutrients in return. So there's three organisms that are involved here in this photosynthetic relationship. Many different organisms can exist in symbiotic relationships with one another. So let's look at a couple scenarios here, and you guys tell me what kind of symbiosis it is. You can either say them out loud, you don't have to raise your hand, or you can just type it into the chat box. Okay, here's the first one. Case study number 1. In India, the chital, a small deer, this guy right here, has trouble finding enough grass to eat during the dry season. So it relies on help from a type of monkey, a gray langur, to get enough to eat. These monkeys are very messy eaters. They drop a lot of food from the trees as they eat, and that food then is eaten by the chital, by the little deer. What kind of symbiosis is this? It's going to be commensalist. Good, Chloe. One benefits, the other couldn't care less. The monkey doesn't care that the chital is eating the food that it drops, but the chital is certainly happy that the food is being dropped down. All right, you know this just from the picture. You're walking through the woods and a tick bites you, but that tick is also carrying the bacteria that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So that bacteria now is transferred to you as long as the tick remains attached to your body. As the tick sucks your blood to feed itself, it's also passing this bacteria onto you. Now, you find the tick and you remove it, thinking no big deal. But after about a month, you start to see a rash around the bite site and you start to run a fever. Other symptoms appear now and you become very sick. Yep, so this is a parasitism for sure. This is 2 kinds of parasites here. So you've got the parasite, well, bacteria is a little bit different. It's an infection more than a parasitic, but the tick is definitely a parasite and a vector for the bacteria as well. All right, here's one. You and your dog are playing outside. You received the dog as a puppy when you were 5. The dog misses you when you're gone and is always excited to see you come home. He sits with you while you watch TV and stroke his fur. Sometimes you even talk to your dog as if he understands your feelings. Your dog is an important part of your life and you cannot imagine your life without him. Yeah, for sure. Mutual. Our pets are a perfect example of mutualism. We both benefit. We provide them with good food, with care, with love, with health care, with all their needs met. And what they provide us with are all the things that we just mentioned here. All right, excellent. Here's another one. Case study number 6. Clownfish live within the waving massive tentacles of sea anemone. So what is that an example of? We talked about that. Yeah, that's mutualism. For sure, mutualism. All right. These are coral bells, these flowers right here. Coral bells and hummingbirds are in a mutualistic relationship and they both benefit. How are they both benefiting? How is the coral bell benefiting? Pollination. There you go, Nathan. Sorry, said it a little too fast. Yeah, pollination. The coral bell gets pollinated. And of course, the hummingbird gets nectar. But hummingbirds could eat nectar from other plants as well. So what do you think would happen if the coral bells all froze in a cold winter and the temperature dropped? What do you think would happen to the hummingbirds? Chrissy.
The hummingbirds would run out of its food source, so it would either have to find another food source for its nectar or it would start dying off.
Yeah, good. So since it does have other food that it eats, hummingbirds eat nectar from other things as well. It probably wouldn't die out completely if it could have enough of that other food source, but certainly the population is going to suffer. There's not going to be as much food as there was when the coral bells were all in full bloom and alive. So yeah, for sure, we would have some suffering, but probably not a complete die out of the hummingbirds as long as they were able to find that extra food. All right, this is a type of strep bacteria that feeds on living tissue. It's called necrotizing fasciitis. What kind of symbiosis is this? This is bacteria that lives on and destroys living tissue. Kind of a gross picture, but yeah, that's parasitism. That's parasitism. I like this one. This is the Egyptian plover, the bird. It eats parasites that feed on crocodiles. Now that crocodile opens its mouth, allowing the bird to hunt all over its body, even inside its mouth. And it doesn't eat the bird. Now, the bird is safe from predators because what kind of predator is going there? Not many predators are going to get that close to the crocodile's wide open mouth in order to eat that bird. This is, yep, you got it. This is mutualism. Excellent. All right. On the edge of an alpine meadow, a beaver cuts down an aspen tree. It eats the bark using some of the timber to shore up its dam, and it stores some of the branches underwater for it to eat later in the winter. Parasitism. Do you ever think of a beaver as being a parasite of a tree? But they are. That's what they do. All right. How about this one here? Tree frogs use plants as protection. Commensalism. Yep, commensalism. The tree doesn't care that the little tree frog is there, but the frog benefits altogether. And of course, the mosquito is parasitism as well. We'll skip over that one. So let's suppose that you notice some colorful flowers and a butterfly walks over a brightly blooming flower, finding nectar inside the flower and getting that pollen on its body. Now, it flies to another flower of the same species a little ways away to find more nectar, but while it's there, some of the pollen gets scraped off onto that second flower. Kind of symbiosis. This is classic mutualism. Yeah, good, Isabel. Classic mutualism, as the flower benefits because it gets pollinated and the pollinator benefits because it gets food. All right. So have you guys ever seen this? This is called lichen, and it is a combination of an algae and a, what's the other species? It's leaving my head right now. Well, they work together, and you'll see this on trees, on fence posts. I like walking around. When I take my walks, I love looking for lichen out in the forest. And how about this one here now? Cattle egrets eat the insects stirred up by the cattle when they are grazing. Yeah, that's commensalism. That's commensalism. Excellent, excellent. All right, I think we're going to jump to a Kahoot now. I want to do a symbiotic relationship Kahoot, and then there might be time. We'll probably be able to come back here. Yeah, algae and fungi. Thank you, Ava. I was forgetting the fungi part of that one. Sometimes my brain won't connect. All right, so let me get this Kahoot up. It's only a 14-question one. It won't be very long. But these relationships are important, so I want to make sure we've got that all down. All right, www.kahoot.it, or you can scan the QR code if you have a QR reader on your phone. The game pin is 851-368. 851-368. One more. Is everybody in who wants to play? All right, we will begin. The game pin will always be down here at the bottom, so you can always join in later, or if you get kicked out, which does sometimes happen. All right, here's our questions. Which of the following words is not a symbiotic relationship? Yeah, botulism. Botulism is a kind of an infection. Botulism, but it's a toxic reaction. In parasitism, the host to know what host means. The host is harmed. So the host is not the parasite. The parasite affects the host. So the host is the one that is harmed in a parasitic relationship. All right, Ava moves into the lead. In mutualism, what happens to the host? It is helped. The host is helped. Question 4. What happens in commensalism? It is neither helped nor harmed. All right, excellent. So here, Chloe moves into second place. Oh, look at that 8-point difference. I like it when it's close. Which of the following is an example of a parasite-host relationship? A tapeworm living in the intestines of a dog. Yep. You guys, I may give, if you have a dog or a cat, you may give them heartworm medication. Heartworm is another example of a parasite that affects dogs. It gets into their hearts. Look at the picture. The deer tick burrows into the skin of a white-tailed deer to feed on the deer's blood. In this relationship, the deer is known as the host. Yep, the deer is the host. Not the parasite. It would be the tick that would be the parasite. The deer is the host. All right, Ava moves into the lead. Question 7. Which of the following describes a parasite-host relationship in a marine environment? Marine has to do with salt water. Generally oceans is what we're talking about with marine. Copepods feed on the eyes of sharks, blinding them. Isn't that awful? That's true. That's true. All right. Let's jump ahead here. Honeysuckle flowers provide nectar to bees and depend on the bees for pollination. This is mutualism. Mutualism. Very good. An orchid flower grows on a tree to get more sunlight. The tree isn't harmed. Commensalism. Commensalism. Wrasse fish eat parasites on other fish. The other fish are cleaned of parasites. This is mutualism. They are mutually benefited by that relationship. Couple more questions. Athlete's foot is a fungus that grows on human feet. It feeds on skin for food and is irritating. That is parasitism. You got it. The yucca plant needs the moth to pollinate its flowers. The moth lays its eggs in the plant.
I'll kick it. Okay, here we go.
That is the yucca plant there. That is mutualism. They both benefit. Barnacles attach themselves to whales to feed off microorganisms. The whale is not helped or harmed. That is commensalism. Great. All right, last question. Which level of a food web contains the most energy? The most energy. Remember the levels of the food web? Always going to be the producers. There's always going to be the most energy, most biomass in the producer level. Remember, at each level that you go up, you lose 90%. Only 10% of available energy goes to the next level in a food pyramid or food web. All right, let's see how we did here now. Isabel's in third place. Well done. Second place, Gideon. And in first place, Ava. All right, excellent, excellent. Very good. Nathan and Chloe are our runners up today. So good job. All right, let's spend just a minute now talking about this term called succession. So you're going to read this week about some changes in ecosystems. Keep in mind, ecosystems are always changing. They're changing in response to natural interferences. They're also sometimes changing in response to human interferences. And as old inhabitants to an area, old organisms that live there either die or move away, new organisms might move in, and that might change the community altogether. So a change in a community over time is called succession. It doesn't really matter whether it's natural or human interference. Either way, it is called succession. You can see here there's a couple different types, primary and secondary succession. So primary succession there has to be basically bare, lifeless substrate first for primary succession to occur. So it happens in an area that was uninhabited before, like a volcanic eruption puts down lava, and that lava hardens into rock. Now, over time, there could be things that move into that area. The very first one to move in is called the pioneer species. Pioneer species are often things like bacteria, lichen, like the fungus, and tell me again, fungus and Ava?
Algae.
Algae, thank you. Why can't I get that? I love lichen. All right, so the fungus and the algae make this lichen, and those are often the pioneer species. So they come in and they start breaking down that rock. And as the rock breaks down into sand and small particles, and then their bodies die and add nutrients, we end up with soil. And now once there's soil, now new species can move in. So this is primary succession. It has to happen where there was only bare rock before, or bare something, bare substrate. No living thing was there in that area. Now, secondary succession was previously inhabited, but there was some kind of event, like maybe a wildfire, that caused a disturbance. So when secondary succession begins, that thing that caused the disruption isn't happening anymore. So the ecosystem will begin to return to normal, to return to its normal conditions, what it was before. So here we have a thriving forest, the fire burns it down. We're left with nothing here, but there was something there before. And so things begin to grow again. So here's a couple scenarios here. This is an area that starts with bare rock. Dirt has to be created before plants and then animals can live there. So this is an example of primary succession. This area started with bare rock. Here's one where a volcanic island is being created. Now, since the volcanic eruption is going to lay down that lava, which is going to harden then into that igneous rock, the type of succession that this is primary. There wasn't something living on that lava first. The lava was laid down first. If a tornado comes through this forest and rips it up, and the trees then begin to grow back, what kind of succession is that? Primary or secondary? Has to be secondary. Yeah, secondary. In order for it to be primary, it has to be in an area where there wasn't life before, like on the rock. Now, keep in mind, at some point, let's say we got an island and there's a volcano that's kind of dormant and it hasn't gone off for a while, and there's a lot of life there. When the volcano erupts, the substrate, the actual lava, is the place where there wasn't life before. So there might have been life under that. When the lava lays down on top of it and becomes hardened, there was life under it, but there was never life on that lava rock before. That's why it would be primary. Here there's life and it's just ripped up. It's not bare rock that's being put down when a tornado goes through here. So this is going to be secondary succession. Now, in some cases, we've got melting glaciers, and when they melt, they reveal rock, and there wasn't life there. What kind of succession is this? There was rock. Yep, this is going to be primary succession. Very good, very good. All right, so here we have a picture of primary succession. So we have our bare rock, and then our first pioneer species come in. Often they are lichen. The lichen begins to break down the rock. As the lichen dies, it puts nutrients into the soil, and then these small little plants and more lichen can develop, and then these perennial herbs and grasses come in. So these very first ones that come in are called pioneer stages. Look how long this takes. This takes hundreds of years. Then we have our intermediate stage, where we've got some grasses, shade intolerant trees that begin to form, until finally we have what we call our climax community. That's the adult, like mature, thriving community. Here we have a hurricane that destroyed the land and everything grew back. This would be, so a hurricane coming in and leaving all this water, and water goes out and then life comes back. That would be an example of secondary succession. It wasn't bare rock that was left there before. All right, here's one here. We've got an uninhabited cave that is now exposed to sunlight because of recent earthquakes. Colonies of bacteria begin to live in the cave. That would be primary succession. All right. All right. One more thing before we run out of time here that I want to talk about are these, the fact that ecosystems are always going to be a combination of living and non-living factors. So the living factors are ones that we call biotic, and the non-living ones are called abiotic. Now, it's important to know when we say abiotic, we don't mean dead. So dead leaves laying on the forest floor, those are still biotic factors. Abiotic factors are ones that are not now and never were alive. So things that were never alive are like water, air, rocks, dirt, sunlight. Now the dirt, that's a little tricky there because dirt is a combination of clay, rock, tiny rock particles, and the dead remains of living things. The remains of the living things part of dirt, that would be biotic. But in general, we say that dirt itself is abiotic. Abiotic means not now and never was alive ever before. So keep that in mind. That's important to remember. And that's something that students a lot of times will confuse those two. So if you take a look at your desk and your desk is made of wood, your desk is a biotic factor. Your pencil, the wood part of your pencil is biotic. The eraser part is abiotic. The paint is probably abiotic because it never was alive. But the wood was once part of a tree or some kind of a plant. All right. Another thing, all organisms in an ecosystem have a niche. So what we mean by niche is not place. A niche is not the place you live. A niche is the role you play in an ecosystem. It could be the feeding relationships of a species within a habitat. So your niche might be to be eaten. Maybe your ecological role is to be eaten by a predator. I know, I like Angry Birds too. That's kind of an old game. I'm surprised you guys recognize it. Is it people still play Angry Birds? Yeah, not so much. It's kind of from the early 2000s, I think. But anyway, yeah. So your childhood, yeah. So a niche is your role. What's your job within the ecosystem that you live in, not where you live. So your niche is not your room in your house. Your niche is the job you play within your family, the role that you play within your family. That would be the same. All right. Anybody have any questions about any of this? All right. I hope you have a wonderful week. We're going to end a couple minutes early. It's a good time to answer any questions. If you have any, throw them my way. If not, I will see you next week. Thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.